okay, so you mentioned meeting Henry Winston and then deciding that basically meeting him as a black communist changed a lot for you because like the Communist Party is not a black organization, but it had black leadership. And I also think that some of it is this thing of the world communist movement that you're seeing, like the role of the Soviet philosophers and like political economists. And so I guess, like, what were you thinking when you decided to join the Communist Party? And how did you think of, I guess, like the world communist movement as a movement of thought? Was that in your consciousness at all? And then also the Vietnam War draft, like you had been drafted, but you didn't go, right? And so
but this time twice.
Yeah, like twice. So can you tell us about that too? And then this possibility of a broader peace movement where at this point, I guess, like white people are also dodging the draft and burning their draft cards. But like you said, you weren't really that interested in a white peace movement. But there is still like this broad sense of peace and the connection to the world communist movement and the world peace movement. And yeah, like ultimately, how did you dedicate yourself, to the Communist Party and to Winston in particular? Like when did you come in contact with him? What was your relationship to him like? And how did you see him like as a revolutionary, but also as a man?
Yeah, that's very important where you put as a revolutionary and a man. And this is, I discovered this among these black communists. And it was not just Winston, but Winston exemplified it, and all of the black people in the Communist Party that I knew experienced looked up to Henry Winston because he had lost his sight in prison but did not give up. So here I am in the presence of someone who was experienced in revolutionary struggle, was not learning on the job as it were, was not making it up as he went along, but had been through this, through the Harlem Renaissance, through the Great Depression, through McCarthyism, and was part of a world movement. And the other thing, you know, he spoke with dignity, very dignified, but you could tell he was a very gentle person, very polite, like a Southern man, because he's from Mississippi. And he spoke with a kind of a Southern accent. And the thing that was impressive was he listened to us. And, you know, the idea that so many of us had and kind of lived like that in our youthful exuberance to be revolutionaries is that to be a revolutionary was to be cold, to not be, you were going to die, so why did you didn't have time to be gentle or be kind. I'm preparing to kill and to die, that kind of thing. And that was a kind of a stereotype of a revolutionary. I don't think the image of Che Guevara did anything to dissuade us from that. So, seeing, these posters of African revolutionaries with an AK-47 and a belt, a bandolier of bullets, that's what we want to be, and to be a revolutionary was to prepare yourself for death at the, battle with the enemy. And so I meet these people that are all the opposite of that.
You're kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I was the kind of opposite of that. I mean, I could never get away from my church and my loving family and all of that, the way I was brought up.
But the dedication to the revolutionary struggle in that spirit, I think.
Yeah. And, all of this coming together then at this point. Yeah. An established revolutionary organization with experienced revolutionaries that had all of the things that a revolutionary movement needs: a newspaper, a theoretical journal, a structure, and then these black people. So we don't have to navigate our way to a revolutionary party through white people. It meant everything, I'm telling you. You know, and I'm telling, I don't want to exaggerate this. I had no basis in my life to trust any white people. Why? Why? I mean, I still have problems with that up till this day. I mean, as you all know. You know, there's not a lot of reason to trust white people. Even that's when we look at the anti-draft movement. Oh, these are all white people who don't want to go into Vietnam, and they're trying to save themselves. They're going to Canada and England, you know, while we're being drafted and on the front lines. And, you know, I was drafted twice. I think the first time in 1965, I was still a student, and I was so afraid, and I said to my mother, what should I do? My brother and I, we always called our mother what we called her when we were children, Mommy. Mommy, what should I do? You know? And she said, well, you go down there and you tell them that you're a student, because all students had deferments. But that didn't mean, they knew I was a student, but they were going to draft black kids, so white kids wouldn't have to go. So I got my Bible, and I went down there and I was reading the Bible before, and I went and told him, you know, I'm a student at Lincoln University. They knew it. So they didn't draft me. In 1971, they drafted me again. By this time, I'm serving the FBI and all. They knew who I was. As a revolutionary, to go to Vietnam as a soldier. And I'd already been to North Vietnam, so they knew that. So, you know, if I'd gone to Vietnam, they would have killed me over there. And I said, you know, I asked my friends, including Father David Gracie, an Episcopal priest from here in Philadelphia, a peace activist, and a close friend of Father Paul Washington. He and my friends, they joined me at what was then the draft board at Broad and Callahill. And I went up there, and you know, they go through all of this kind of physical shit. And I told them, I'm not going. You all deal with it, I'm not going. And I had my people outside, they were protesting on my behalf. And so they didn't draft me, but they gave me this status of, I don't know, triple X, meaning, you know, the worst of the worst, you know. But, so I didn't go. And they didn't draft, you know, by this time, Muhammad Ali is changing the nature of the peace movement, the anti-Vietnam, and Martin Luther King, those two. And Ali's courage was just so magnetic. I was made more courageous by him, as I was by the example of the Black Panther Party, you know. And so that's 71. I do remember 1971, Marvin Gaye comes out with What's Going On. And that was a great political event, because it was the greatest anti-war, pro-people music that ever came out of the anti-Vietnam War struggle. They can talk about Bob Dylan all they want. Even Pete Seeger, who was a great man, a great folk singer, all of this thing. Nothing equaled Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, because it spoke to the souls of the people, especially the souls of black folk. We were so happy with that song because they had black music was suppressed anyway, but nothing political could ever come out of Motown.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And Marvin fought for that. And then other songs came out. You know, War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And Freda Payne, Bring the Boys Home. And these black singers singing anti-war music. This was not unconnected to King, his assassination, his anti-war, and Muhammad Ali. It all was coming together. And I guess you'd have to say we're riding the great wave of resistance. You just can't imagine it. You would ask me about Winston. Well, how did you put, there's something else you were asking me, Nora.
Well, I feel like you did kind of answer it,
Oh,
but
okay.
well, no, you did answer, like, how you were drawn to him, what made the difference, why you joined the Communist Party. But I guess one of the other questions was, like, why the World Communist Movement also resonated with you, because in some ways, like, you're seeing the Communist Party as a vehicle to push forward
As
the
a
actual
part of,
political struggle.
absolutely.
But that political struggle is, I think, in your conception, not just the class struggle or Marx,
Oh, no.
but as part of a world movement
Yes.
connected to the African liberation struggle,
Absolutely.
the trip to North Vietnam,
Absolutely.
stuff like that. And so
Absolutely.
how is that thinking?
See, this is what made, it's Winston,
Yeah.
but then I meet Ishmael Flory, who would be difficult for me to describe. He's a Chicagoan, he's from Louisiana, he's an older man, Winston's generation. But then I meet Margaret Burroughs and her husband, Charlie Burroughs, who had a museum in their basement that ultimately became the DuSable Museum. But then I learned, and you know, Margaret's husband, he's always walking around drunk in the house. You know, I learned that he had fought in the Soviet army during World War II. So I'm meeting all of these interesting black people. You know, and then of course, people from the Harlem Renaissance, like William L. Patterson, like Louise Thompson Patterson, people who knew Du Bois in real life and in real time. Yeah. And so I'm saying, wait a minute now.
It's like getting into.
And then I went to the Soviet Union. And I'm young, skinny as you say, with this big afro, to the Congress of the Soviet Komsomol. I don't know what the word Komsomol means in Russian, but it was what we would call the Young Communist League of the Soviet Union. And as
this was right after joining, right? Like
absolutely,
70,
that's
1970.
right, 1970. The spring may have been May of 1970.
And you were also leading a delegation, right?
I led
From
the delegation
from
more or
CPUSA.
less.
How did that happen?
And so I spoke. And as I told you, you know, they read my speech before because they had to translate it. And the Standing Committee of the Politburo of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union is in attendance when I speak. So it was Brezhnev, you might not know these names now, Kosygin, I think Podgorny, and others that I don't really know who were there. And I give this speech and they give me a standing ovation. But then it's the 25th anniversary of the defeat of Nazism. This is huge in the Soviet Union. So we go to Leningrad, and we learn about the 380-some day siege, where over 1 million people died because they were starved to death. And then we go to what they then called Volgograd, which was the old Stalingrad, which was where the central battle between the Red Army and the Wehrmacht, the Nazi army. and they lined up, and I've seen photos of it, and when the dust cleared, the Soviet army had defeated the Nazi army, which began this long retreat of the German army, back towards Germany. And that was something to hear about, to be in that city, to see these great monuments, huge, many stories high, heroic monuments of fighters, symbolic of the fighters. And then I learned, then they had estimated that 20 million people had died. But now we know it's upwards of 27 million. It was a great sacrifice. No nation has ever sacrificed so much for humanity as they had. I don't care how you talk about it. And this sacrifice kind of was also, and this solidarity was given towards the Asian, the Vietnamese, and the African independence movements. And of course we knew about the Patrice Lumumba Friendship University, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there we were invited to go to Vietnam, and I was joined there by two of our comrades who came from the United States, Jay Schaffner and Mike Zagarel, and the three of us were in Vietnam. And in the throes of a great battle, whether we saw everything, and I don't know that we saw everything, but just to be there as an act of solidarity. It was illegal to be there, although many people, including Diane Nash and Jane Fonda and others, had gone to defy the U.S. government. And Vietnam, North Vietnam was living under these bombs. But they had this strong solidarity with the Soviet Union, to a lesser extent, I think, with China. There were ideological differences between the Vietnamese communists and the Chinese Communist Party, but there was solidarity, And so then I returned to the United States. We put out that pamphlet that Kathy talks about. And I then, am speaking on that. And I have to say, with all due respect, I didn't have any fear of anything. No fear. But it was a period where a lot of people were fearless. And I wasn't going to be a punk. If I say I'm about this, this is what I'm about, And just one more thing on that. I know there's a lot. I know Pooh was trying to get the timeline straight. This is when Winston comes up. As the war in Vietnam is shifting towards victory for the Vietnamese. The North Vietnam Army had completely committed itself to the war in the South, which made a lot of difference. North Vietnam was not always prepared to fully commit its military forces to South Vietnam and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam. South Vietnam is different politically from North Vietnam, just like Korea, And so when they finally do, this is about 1970, they establish a road from North Vietnam through Cambodia down to the south, known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And this support of North Vietnam to South Vietnam was supported by Prince Sihanouk of Vietnam, of Cambodia. The man is no joke. You know what I'm saying? You would think so, because he acted a little bit I thought he was Uncle Tom, but I found out he wasn't. The way he talked, you know what I'm saying, it was almost like, I don't know, you know, something like that. But he was thorough. And then the United States started bombing Cambodia. So the war was widened from South Vietnam and North Vietnam to Cambodia and Laos. So it's all of Southeast Asia. Just like the Israelis have expanded this war from Gaza, all, you know. And so by 1973, the opposition in the United States and the heroism of the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnam National Liberation Forces had become so intense that the United States had started talking about Vietnamizing the war. So to replace US troops with Vietnamese. You see what I'm saying? You know, a well-known tactic of the white man. You, now you're going to try to, you're going to put it on. So they get all of these Vietnamese criminals and thugs and make them the head of the so-called Vietnam Army. And of course, the National Liberation Movement just kicked their behinds easily. And then the North Vietnamese Army, a new level of discipline, a higher level of organization. So we knew it was ending. There were peace talks going on. And Winston comes up by 1973 with the idea, now we must shift our focus to the National Liberation Movement in Southern Africa. That was his tactical and strategic brilliance. Severely underestimated. It has not yet been really assessed, his brilliance. As the Vietnamese struggle was winding down, rather than pause and look at what had been achieved, he says, now we must shift to the National Liberation Movement in Southern Africa. And this is when he comes up with the formation of a National Anti-Imperialist Movement in solidarity with Southern Africa. And he writes the book Strategy for a Black Agenda. And as I've always said, a book that is not understood, and dismissed by most people, but the Saturday Free School. So then I become a part of this organizing collective, and we're going all around the country speaking and mobilizing Black folk to come to this conference. And Winston theorized that it would be, as he said, national in form, that is Black, but anti-imperialist in content. Yeah, which meant that it was not anti-white. In fact, it sought alliances with white labor, with white peace activists, etc.
Right.
And so, we hold that conference in Chicago in October of 1973. So at that point, I'm no longer employed. I come back to Philadelphia, and I asked my father, who was a longshoreman, could I get a job on the waterfront? And he didn't want me to, because he's an immigrant from Cape Verde, and he wants his boys who are college men. The same thing you hear from a lot of immigrants to this, about the, you have to achieve, you have to be a college man, you have to, all that stuff. So, and be a professional. So he reluctantly takes me down to the riverfront and shows me how to sign up. And then I bring several of my friends who are in the Communist Party down there. So we're going to set up a revolutionary caucus on the waterfront. Yes, we should. So,
Yeah.
and working on the waterfront is a great experience. It's an experience that I grew from. I think I was down there about a year. And I worked in 2 unions. There were 2 unions down there. The waterfront was severely segregated, black and white. So I go down there. So there's one union which is called Deep Water, and the other which is called Car Gang. That doesn't describe the work we did. Deep Water was the union that went on the ships, and, oh, you leaving? That went on the ships and unloaded them. In other words, oh no, yeah, I kind of took y'all down to let y'all see a little bit. But, you know, it's a different waterfront because it's been mechanized, automated, and you got containerization. But when I went down there, you would, all of the cargo was in the hold. You know, down below the surface, the deck. All the cargo was down there. And so, let us say, a lot of ships came from Korea. I think a lot of the ships from Korea had hides, you know, you know, like leather,
Okay.
cow hides and all of that. Or, yeah, the ships from Korea, they would often have frozen meat. Or frozen fish. So, a ship would come from Korea, and so they would tell us, you know, and so, you know, I kind of told you all this before. The labor force on the waterfront is organized into gangs. The gangs were racially exclusive. You had white gangs, and then among whites you had Irish and Polish. I don't know about Italian, but definitely. And so, and then the other gangs were black. The majority of people on the riverfront, workers, were black. So, I was not a member of a gang yet. So, I would go down, or people like me, we would go down there every morning, and get down there about 6:30, the riverfront. And I showed you where that was. And so, Charlie Johnson's gang, they'd say, Charlie Johnson's gang, you work in the ship from South Korea, okay? And he would have so many people in the gang, and then they would hire others because they needed more men. And so my friends and I, we could sign up for work on the South Korea ship. Now the South Korea ship, because all of the fish are in containers that are down below, but it's frozen. So it's a refrigerated ship. So working that ship is really hard because it's so cold. But you know, it didn't make us any difference. Or if a ship came from Ghana, Ghana brought a lot of cocoa beans, you know. And we liked to do the Ghanaian ships because we could rap with the Ghanaians and eat some of their food, you know what I'm saying? So, this is just a story, you'll know. See, when you work on a ship and you have to, let's say, the beans are in bags, 50-pound bags. So it would be like you and your breaster, and you'd have hooks. And you, boom, you hit into the bag, and you and your breaster lift it, boom, and then put it on the pallet. Then you know, load the pallet up. And then in many instances, my father was working on the crane. They called it a winch. So lower it, hook that up, and they take that out and put it on the pier. Okay? And that's you do that all day. Bam, bam. You know. So my breaster was my friend named Royce Adams. And so on. And we worked on different ships together. We had a Native American brother with us. His name was Dell. He was living here in Philadelphia. He was down there with us. There was Brian Jones, white guy. He was down with us. But, okay. There was also just one other, and that's how I got to know Lucian Blackwell. Because Lucian Blackwell was the president of the union that we called, that dealt with what they call car gang. In other words, after things were unloaded from the ship onto the pier, another group of men would load those pallets or whatever onto either a truck or train car. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes when we couldn't get work on the ship, we would work in car gang. I got to know Lucian that well. Lucian had known my father, and his brothers had known my father because his whole family comes off of the waterfront. Okay, I just want to tell you all that. But but this one day, I'm working on an ore ship. You know, ore. Ore could be iron ore or other metals. And, you know, one of those ships, they would have a crane that, you know, have one of those things that open and go boom, bring the ore, because the ore is piled up all the way to the top. So they would unload it, and then after they got to the bottom, so what do? You're not going to waste all of that ore that the crane can't bring up. So they put a bulldozer down there, and it began to move all of the ore that was left into piles. But we down there too. Yeah. And we had shovels.
That's so far.
Yeah. And put it in buckets or something, and then another crane would take it out. But we down there with that bulldozer. It was very it was almost like back in the prehistoric times, you know. But okay, so I'm down there, right? So Jarvis Tyner, I don't know how he got through to get to that ship. So he said, "Hey Tony," look up his, I say, "Hey, what's up, man? Can I talk to you?" I said, "Yeah, but I gotta wait till our lunch hour." You know, he said, "All right, I'll wait for you up here." You know? So when the lunch hour came, so it's a big ladder, about 2 or 3 stories down. So I climb up the ladder, and then, you know, so we go to a place, a diner on Oregon Avenue, and you know, that's where a lot of times we went to eat or something like that. So he said, "Look, man, Winnie want to know if you will take over NAIMSAL." You know what I'm saying? I said, "Wow, man, I'm down there on the waterfront now. I don't know. I got to think about it." You know what I'm saying? He said, you know, we talked a little bit more. He said, "All right, I'll tell Winnie what you said." This sounds conspiratorial, like revolutionary. But okay, so because Winston and them had wanted, or at least they said they wanted Franklin Alexander to head NAIMSAL. Franklin was a friend of mine. He's a very close friend of Angela Davis's, and they're all West Coast people, Northern California. The West Coast party is a whole different thing. You know, if you ask me, they were never fully in line with the party. They were so far away so they could do their thing and be them, you know. So Franklin, who's a great friend of mine, ends up committing suicide and stuff, but that's another story. Winston had wanted the headquarters of NAIMSAL to be in New York for obvious reason. He wasn't going to let it be in no California where they could do what they wanted to do with it. And he knew they were not ideologically reliable, I think. So when Franklin says, I can't move to New York, because he has a family, he has a wife, and so on. His wife is the head of the party in Northern California. She's a very young woman like him. So Winston asked me to do it. I thought about it a few days, and I called Jarvis. I said, look at him, man. I'll do it. I'll meet with Winnie, see what, you know. So I meet with Winnie, and he says, look, Tony, yada, yada, yada. Now, Winston, by this time, and this is just a small matter, had begun calling me the prodigal. I've had different names over the years. Call me the prodigal, like prodigal son. And he, you know, lays it out. But I'm not going to move to New York. My sense is that my life is here, that I needed to be anchored. I couldn't go up there with New York. I mean, New York is attractive then because rents were affordable in Manhattan, and New York is the center of the world, I guess, and all of the entertainment, all the music, yada, yada, yada. And the party headquarters is there, and, you know, the UN. But I could not move to New York. I was going to stay here. And I asked Winnie, would it be okay if I commuted to New York? Which a lot of people were doing then and are doing now. And it was you could commute for a month for $100. You can't even get a round trip for $100 now. So I began. A woman by the name of Marvel Cook, you should look her up, a very important figure in the Harlem Renaissance, and a communist, agrees to give us her office. But I was working alone. Without saying it, there was and I've only now come to understand it, there was a certain boycott of NAIMSAL. One, because, and there were many, not all, you know, there were many reasons to oppose it that people used to oppose. One, because they saw it as a form of black nationalism, you know.
When you say it was opposed, you mean within the party?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Some because, you know, Franklin Alexander's friends and relatives, because it was me. And I was this young person. You know, people sometimes fear you if they think that you're, he's too, you know, and they would then begin wage a struggle against me, the likes of which I'd never seen and never could understand. Too young, but I could always talk to Winston. I never wanted to talk to him about the difficulties I was having because I didn't want to burden him with all that. But there were reasons. But many of the black people supported it, especially in Chicago. Especially in Chicago. But we had committed ourselves to struggle to get 1 million signatures calling for the expulsion of South Africa from the UN. We end up getting 100,000. This is in 1974. And then in 1975, you know, I made connections to this UN Special Committee Against Apartheid, where I meet E.S. Reddy, this tall Indian, beautiful cat. I mean, sometimes I ask myself, where have all the Indians gone? I mean, because this crop over here now, these white Indians, man, please. But anyway, I just, yes. And he was like the executive organizer of the Special Committee Against Apartheid. The chair of it was the ambassador from Guinea, and she was a woman named Madame Cissé. And I don't know if she spoke a lot of English, she didn't speak much, but we finally gathered these 100,000 signatures, and in a lot of ways I kind of was the one doing a lot of the collecting of signatures. A good part of the party was hands off, which pointed to a problem that I could not fully understand at the time. But when he continued to encourage me, Tony, how's it coming, this, that, the other. Well, let me just finish this. We present these signatures, and William L. Patterson, who had a lot of influence on the actor Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, got Ossie Davis, along with some others I forget, to present these signatures. And Madame Cissé, you might, if you do a search of the UN Special Committee, they thanked us for this contribution to the struggle against apartheid. But if you can imagine 1974-75, South Africa would not be independent for another 20 years. And so the ideological struggle for African solidarity had to be waged. This is some of the pamphlets that Kathy talked about. And then speaking all over the country. And this is where you get, I remember the article Johan brought that was in Jacob, and this guy named Michael Meyerson that attacked Romesh Chandra. So, but then as the head of NAIMSAL, I also became connected to the World Anti-Imperialist and Peace Forces. That's how I would end up in places like Afghanistan, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Angola, Algeria, where else? I don't know, everywhere. Cuba, Guyana, I guess some other places along the line.
Is that also how you met Romesh?
Well,
in
yes.
Cuba?
Well, I met Romesh at many of these conferences, but then Romesh was a very close friend of Henry Winston. Very close friend. And the beauty of the whole thing, the symmetry of it, was that Coretta Scott King and SCLC, including Ralph Abernathy and Joseph Lowry and others, began to move towards the World Peace Movement. And Romesh understood it. And that's why I wish Johan would have just done his dissertation on the 1975 tour.
Of the World Peace.
Of the World Peace Council to the United States and to Black America. And they've embraced him in churches, the Black newspapers, the Black Civil Rights Organization. And Romesh understood what all this meant. And Winston understood it. And but Romesh was part of a world movement against neocolonialism. And the World Peace Council was housed or located in Helsinki, Finland. But Indira was very important in the Indian government in financing the World Peace Council along with the Soviet Union.